let's be honest, guys, Nintendo is not shoving Fire Emblem down anyone's face. Anyone who argues that Nintendo is, pushing the franchise too much into people's mindsets is blatantly wrong. Now, why am I saying this? Well, I had a conversation with a friend of mine recently. He's a huge Smash Bros. Fan. It is one of the only games from Nintendo he actually plays. And he was complaining that there was too many anime sword fighters in Smash Brothers. Now, I think the issue with this argument, straight up off the bat, there's only one or two arguments I'm going to make in this video, by the way, is the fact that the anime sword fighter argument is kind of invalid because there are 4 different JRPGs, at least as far as I'm aware, that include Final Fantasy, Xenoblade, and Kingdom Hearts, as well as Fire Emblem, when it comes to the characters, right? And I will say that the roster for Smash Bros. Does need more diversity when it comes to actually how each character fights and the franchises that are represented within, obviously, Smash Bros. I do think that the argument of there are too many of these characters in Smash Bros. Is wrong because, let's be honest, most people probably don't even realise that these are from 4 separate different franchises. They just all happen to be JRPGs. Now, another argument I'm going to make here is actually, if Nintendo is pushing Fire Emblem too much, let's look at the facts. Fire Emblem has 5 games on the Switch. It is not that massive franchise that has been pushed massively on the Switch. The Switch was on the market for 8 years. That's average about, 1 game every 1.5 years, something like that. It's nothing too crazy when you think about it. But then you look at, say, Kirby. Kirby, for example, has had 6 games on the Switch. At least this is from the information I found online. Zelda had a new game every year for the Switch. Zelda had 8 games on the Switch. And this isn't including Switch Online stuff, by the way, so this is just actual new releases for the Switch. And then we have games like Pokemon. Pokemon had 12 games, and I know Pokemon technically is a cheat because obviously I know Pokemon releases 2 games a time. And you also got to factor in Mario. Mario had 21 games released on the Switch. Now, people justify the argument that Pokemon, Zelda, and Mario are the popular franchises. These are the ones that everyone knows, everyone plays if they have a Nintendo platform, right? That is true. However, you cannot complain that Fire Emblem has too many games when it has about the same amount of games as Kirby, and it has way less than Pokemon, Zelda, and Mario, which are obviously the main draws for the system. So the argument that Nintendo is pushing Fire Emblem in everyone's face is kind of null and void just based on that logic, right? Because how could Nintendo keep pushing a franchise and be making too many games for it when you actually compare Fire Emblem to other franchises, it's got the same amount of games on the Switch that Xenoblade, or about the same as Xenoblade and Kirby, we give or take 1 game. And thing is, guys, people need to also realise that Nintendo needs to appeal to a wide market. Nintendo's whole franchise base, they have JRPGs, they have fighting games, they have platformers, they have 2D platforms, 3D platforms, they have racing games, they have sports games. Nintendo's whole thing is trying to cast a wide net. So with them having 5 Fire Emblem games across 8 years, that's nothing crazy to me, to be honest. And when you consider, obviously, like I said, Zelda, Mario, and Pokemon have loads more, and Fire Emblem is more of a middle-of-the-road franchise anyway, so it kind of makes sense that those games would obviously have quite a few games, but obviously nothing too major. It kind of makes a lot of sense. But then people will argue, well, Mario's the mascot. He deserves to have 21 games. That is true, but when you actually look at a lot of the Mario games we got on the Switch, a lot of them were ports of previously existing games, and there wasn't really much new added to them, right? I kind of feel like the argument that Fire Emblem has been pushed too much for Nintendo is largely because, obviously, the bias of Smash Bros. Fans. But because if you actually start looking at the facts and point out the fact that there are only 5 Fire Emblem games in 8 years, which I know is a lot of games for a lot of people, but Nintendo is no indie company. Nintendo's not like some sort of small team that no one's ever heard of. These guys have worth like $100 billion. These guys know what they're doing. These guys have the teams to make these games. And even Fire Emblem fans don't like some of the new Fire Emblem games, right? So I don't see the argument on why Nintendo is pushing it too much. It's in everyone's faces and whatnot, when realistically it's actually not. It's just literally because Smash Bros. Fans can't tell the difference between a Fire Emblem character, a Xenoblade character, or a Final Fantasy character. That is just this is where it all comes from. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you're new, make sure you subscribe, like, share, comment, turn notifications, all that sort of stuff, guys. I've been EC and I'm signing out. Peace.